No problem.
Just
right.
being an idiot, I forgot to do it a couple of days ago as well.
No worries.
When we spoke to somebody from or one of your colleagues really from Water and Music, right? So this is Natalie recommended to us Black Dave and Dave Curry, and he was speaking about his similar investigation of Web3, and he said as a musician he felt now that he had to acquire a lot of different skills as an artist, as somebody producing merchandise, working on multiple platforms, had to re-educate himself both, you know, intellectually, technologically, financially, creatively, and so on. Have you found that that was also necessary for you?
It is necessary. And I think two things. One, when you come into any industry very early, there is a lot of kinks that you're working through trial and error, and you have to learn. But at the same time, the user experience, which is something I'm really big on as well, will improve. You know, it will be of second nature. The tech will improve, the infrastructure will improve, things will become more streamlined. So if you think of maybe your iPhone and your phone has to update, or your Mac, and then you don't really think about, well, what does this update mean? You just kind of click update, and then your phone works smoothly after that. And so the blockchain is very much in its infancy state with the entertainment side, with the tracking. There's new layers being put on the blockchain to speed things up. And in this industry, you have something called the trilemma, which has to do with the scalability, the decentralization, and the security of the space. And the trilemma is that you can only deal with 2 out of those 3 at a time. And so different developers are working on, hey, we need this to be scalable, or no one will come into this industry. It will just be us nerds. We need this tech to be user-friendly so that we not only have adoption, but we have retention. The other thing is decentralization, and security. So it doesn't matter, you know, if the user experience is great, but say you get hacked, say you lose all your money, say you lose your music that you were trying to give out to the world. That's also going to reduce the amount of people that come into the space, reduce the retention. And so there is a lot of learning, but at the same time, it has to move in parallel with infrastructure being improved so that people actually want to use the technology and can benefit from the technology. A fourth one that's not included in the trilemma is more a personal self-awareness that I have of affordability. Who has access to this type of technology? That again depends on the outside of your government where you live, but 2, can you afford to even be in this space? Because it costs money to participate. And so that's what some of the other developers are working on. They're working on layers that make it cheaper for people to participate. So that's something we have to be conscious of, because we could be marginalizing great talent just because it's expensive to participate.
What do you think would be the best new skills for a musician to acquire in order to feel more confident in this area?
I think the first thing is understanding that your skills are transferable, right? I came from science and public health and skill sets that are not in tech, but those skill sets still translate when you're trying to solve a problem for whatever industry you're in, not just music. You know, it could literally be any industry. So knowing that is also going to help with your confidence coming into the space. The second is being flexible and open to learn. The tech is new and there's a lot of vocabulary. So the more you can learn the jargon, the verbiage, when you speak to others, you can go beyond just what does that word mean? You can now ideate what can that look like for your industry? What can that look like for your project? But if you don't understand the simple terms, it becomes a lot harder to participate. And I believe that everyone has valid prior education to participate and to be a part of the conversation and shaping how the tech goes. So yeah, you need to arm yourself with knowledge like that.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, even though you were developing as an individual and educating yourself, how you joined a collective and became part of Feature, and what that how simultaneously how that looked like an attractive option because the company was promising, but also what it taught you as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. The beauty of this space too is I meet so many different people, and sometimes you'll have similar pain points, but you'll meet people from so many different backgrounds. And so it really opens up the flexibility of your mind and how to solve problems. When Feature came to me, the CEO, Stephen Alous, he has over 20 years experience in the film industry. He worked with Stan Lee since he was like 18 and 19. He worked on The Matrix Reloaded. He was always at the edge of tech and on the creative side. So what he wanted to do was turn Hollywood upside down. That was his specific goal. And he said, I want to use the blockchain by putting scripts on there. I want to bring writers to the blockchain, and I want Hulu and HBO and Netflix to come to the blockchain and purchase those scripts on chain so we can see what they're paying for, and we can get some diversity in Hollywood, because it's a very gated community. The same with music. Music is very gated. Sometimes it's who you know. And so he really wanted to shift the paradigm there. What he ended up doing, as he brought me on, he said, I want you to lead the head of community and help us grow this company, and the ethos around it. And he shifted to opening up not only to script writers, but to the current content that the Web3 artists were creating. He noticed, hey, there's a lot of creators now. There's a lot of artists here. We don't have to limit ourselves to scripts. Let's bring IP and licensing on chain. So he wanted to do that for scripts, but he opened that up further to the current IP. And so that I found that, very interesting from that beginning of the jump when he was first talking about scripts. And that's when I jumped on the team about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now. And from there, a really amazing proof of concept was working with Netflix. And what we did was we embedded QR codes into season 3, in which people could just scan with their phones and collect or mint these free kind of digital collectibles. And the result of that was there was over 92 million page views, over 140,000 mints, and various different collectors from around the world. You saw China VPNing in heavily to participate. And it was a beautiful proof of concept that people don't only want to talk about their favorite show, but they want to participate beyond just, hey, how was that episode last night? Now they had a piece that they collected from that episode. And so that was a really big one for us to kind of show what Web3 technology can do when it has an easier user experience. Beyond doing that, we did for Coinbase, the Degen trilogy, and we helped with the casting call for Bored Ape Yacht Club for those apes. And so people got to license their apes to put into the Degen trilogy, and it was all on chain, all on the blockchain. And then the last big example was Huxley, which is a 6-series graphic novel by Ben. All right, can you hear me? I think
Yeah,
I
you
got
disappeared for a second. You're back. That's good.
Okay, awesome. So for Ben, he had created this comic, this graphic novel, and it took him almost a decade. It took him almost a decade because he wanted to own his own IP beyond just creating for those big names that I talked about earlier. And so what we did was we took his graphic novel and we did what's called the tokenomics, which is the economics in the NFT space. And we created this gamification of collecting these comics, and it did really well. We did issue 1 and we sold all 10,000 of those. We did issue 2, same thing. Issue 3, same thing. Issue 4, I think maybe over 6 or 8,000, and the same with 5 and 6. And he realized that he could really support himself as a creator instead of having to always create for big IP. And so it also really kind of brought the bar up for Web3, because at the time gaming was pretty much 8-bit games, little play to earn games, things that are not interesting to maybe some of the larger gamers, the larger gaming community. And there was a lot of pushback. So we were really pushing the bar, pushing the limit, showing Web3 that you can have high quality artists in this space, and not just 8-bit type of art, which is also fine too, right? That has a whole niche. But there, again, like bringing more diversity of IP and voices to the blockchain is what's really going to drive more retention from the rest of the world.
I mean, you raise a very, very important issue there, which is that arguably the biggest barrier to people using blockchain is complexity or perceived complexity. People just think it's too difficult, they don't understand it. So as head of community at Feature, how do you go about persuading people that this is either financially appealing or socially attractive or just simply fun and a new way of engaging with creative, musical, and graphic artists?
Well, the first thing is knowing your audience and meeting people who are already there, at the same time bringing in new voices. So you want to honor the people that are already in the space and they're interested in what you're doing and they want to support you. The other thing is storytelling. That's what's going to drive people to buy anything. You know, if they actually like your story, if they actually like the person behind it, if they find the community fun to be around and everyone being respectful. So myself and the community team at Feature and Huxley made sure that we manage those expectations of respect, because right now the demographic in the space is mostly white male. And so you're just getting a very narrow perspective of what community could look like. And so we made that a big point to work on, what does our community look like in Huxley? You know, we're not about creating passive income or about flipping something to make money off of this comic. We're really about the storytelling of this comic and about supporting Ben and his decade-long journey to finish this graphic novel, which is now being turned into a full-on feature film by Ari Arad, by Arad Productions, and Jerome Chen. So Ari Arad, he did Iron Man, Ghost in the Shell. So it's a really amazing, again, I think Huxley is just really pushing the standard in the Web3 space, like the level of quality that we're bringing to the Web3 space will also help that proof of concept to get people to come in. So at the moment, we can't control how complex it is, right? You talked about how do you get people to come in? How do you simplify it? And that's a collaboration between developers and blockchain developers and marketplaces and community builders and artists. They need to be a part of the conversation or it will stay very complicated. And I think we're right at this juncture where that's improving. You know, when I first came in, it was really confusing for myself. And it still is confusing, but it's becoming a better conversation in which it's less confusing. And now I think the next battle will be driving traffic to whatever you're doing, because now you have to sift through all the noise. You know, who actually has a good project, who actually is a good actor, making sure that you're not getting scammed or clicking incorrect links. So that it's a lot of work to handle community, and the rapport is so important, because if you lose that trust, then they're not going to want to participate further. And now you've lost people in your community, or they've lost interest, maybe because of a bad project, but it doesn't mean the entire space is bad. So it's a constant effort to educate, to respectfully onboard, and to manage expectations so that it's not something that's just about financial gain, but it's about supporting the creator.
I wonder if you can say a bit more about storytelling, because you're at least the third, if not the fourth guest that we've had who's mentioned this. So when you're working at a company like Feature, first of all, you're a songwriter, so you have that skill. Obviously, you're dealing with graphic novels, you're now dealing with movies and so on and so forth. How do you build a story within a community? Because it's not like you're writing a novel. It's the storytelling it's a matter of persuasion on your part as well, right? You have to somehow persuade multiple people with multiple different interests. that there is some narrative that they want to see develop, that they emotionally care about. So when we spoke to Dave Curry, he said he plays not only with his own backstory as an artist, but also with American history. And then when we spoke to Natalie, she had her incredible story where she said she dropped out of college 7 times. And then she said, she almost ended up in prison, et cetera, et cetera. And she said she turned those, or what she called a wild childhood, she turned that into an incredibly engaging story. And I said, you could make a movie out of that. But a shared story within a community is slightly different. And I wonder how you develop that sense that everybody is, that everybody cares about a single storyline.
Yeah, for me, it's slightly different because I'm often helping other communities with their storytelling. I don't often go as deep with my own because how I kind of operate in the space is offering space for others to tell their story. And that's another thing is everyone wants to say something. Everyone has a story, including myself, but I'm just a person that fosters that space so the person on the other end of our conversation can share their story. And the second thing is I'm very selective of who I work with, collaborate with, and say yes to, because if that person is authentic, it's very easy for me to also be a part of that journey. And if they're not, I would have a very difficult time, or I just wouldn't participate in that. And so as people are telling their stories, and people are listening and deciding if they want to participate or not, there just needs to be space for that to happen. And that's where Natalie and Dave and we really connected because we offered a space on this social app called Clubhouse, where we let everyone come up and talk about their journey and offered a lot of patience to hear it. And from people just listening simultaneously, sorry, I'm going to turn down the background. As people are listening to these stories, they can go, hey, that feels like my story, or I feel like I can relate to that struggle. There was a lot of single mothers, that came on, people that came from architecture and engineering that was trying to find their place. And you actually realize that the stories are more common than not. The educational background, the occupational backgrounds were all different, but the goal was the same. And so if you have that in mind, you know how to help people from various backgrounds and meet them where they're at. And so that's the important part of storytelling, is actually making sure everyone has space to tell their story and not just repeating your own story over and over.
So we've got an audience question here that speaks to that directly. What's the best way to arrange relationships or interaction within a decentralized community?
Yeah, so we started on an app called Clubhouse. Twitter then took that tech and brought it to Twitter and called it Twitter Spaces. And so they brought the audio there where people could share. You also have Discord, Telegram. People are even looking to like Geneva now because Discord is sometimes overwhelming for people. That's another application you now have to learn, but you can really organize your community through Discord. You can create channels, you can have video and voice, you can do storytelling, you can play music. And so those are generally the places where people start to connect with a community. And you can do it in a couple of ways. You could do it with building community first, and then maybe dropping your IP and saying, hey, you guys have all been rocking with me for this amount of time. I feel like we know each other. I'm now going to drop my NFT, my artwork that I've been talking about. Or you can do the reverse of that. You can create your IP and then build from there. And that's what we did with Huxley. Ben had a fully fledged graphic novel. All 6 issues were done. A lot of the projects in the space, they decided to create something within a few months and then drop it. But this was Ben's life's work and it was already finished. So that built an audience on its own because people said, wow, this guy is serious. He has a great background and it's already finished. We're not waiting for him to draw the next graphic novel. We're not waiting for him to start the gaming. He already has contacts in gaming. He's already starting that. And so it's just always a very different scenario where we're bringing something that's finished and building community after that. So it could be either way. But the most important thing is finding those tools of how to communicate, whether that's Discord, Twitter, all of the above, and being authentic with your IP again.
So I missed the name of the post Discord app. So you said Discord can be a bit overwhelming, and then you said there was an app beyond that. What was that?
Yeah, so Telegram is another common one, and
Oh yeah,
then Geneva is kind of a
Geneva.
newer one. Yeah, there's a couple out there. I mean, this is a common question on Twitter that we ask each other. What is the Discord alternative? Because Discord is, again, a niche app for gamers. So a lot of gamers were really savvy to Discord, and if you weren't a gamer, you had to learn Discord. And so people are trying to find some type of decentralized app beyond Discord, because Discord is technically not decentralized. It's a centralized app.
So I'm just looking, Geneva is decentralized or not? It's just a popular.
I think it's just one of the alternatives that people are trying to try out. There's another one in the making right now that might not even have a name or a name I can share, but this is another pain point that people are trying to solve for, especially brands. As brands come in, they have not a lot of experience unless they're gaming brands with Discord. So again, it's that retention question. Like, this, it becomes difficult to gather a community to then drop announcements in there and support the collective. So it's very much a fluid conversation of what can be a decentralized app. And Feature actually will be offering something like that to solve this aggregation problem. So how I explain it is that you have these different tiers of community or audience. You have maybe like your email list, maybe you have Twitter, if they're a little bit more degen is one of the terms we use, and then Discord if you're really degen. But what we want to do at Feature is take you off of the phone and the laptop and bring you to the living room and actually stream and watch these things with your family. And again, like, reduce that barrier of entry to enjoy this IP. So what we've done is created an area in which you can message while you watch the show or the movie right there. We've created a hardware that's about 4x4 inches, and you plug in HDMI from that hardware directly into the TV. Because another barrier is, do you own a smart TV that can interact with NFTs, that can show your artwork or stream your movie? And there are various different screens and casters, and some of them are up to $25,000 for one. It's very expensive. So no one is going to participate except for maybe a very thin slice of people that can afford having screens like that, just to showcase the work. So creating this hardware box is kind of a game changer. We hope it does really well, but again, you're just plugging in right to your TV that you already own. And now you're enjoying this as a family. You can message on there, you can purchase live, you can learn to earn, and you're not having to go into Discord and making it very difficult or learning a new skill just to enjoy your favorite shows.
If I can turn to a few questions about music within the type of environments that you're describing. The first question from the audience is a very straightforward one. How can people get past the problem that this technology is just expensive to use? So for example, it may not be a matter of, let's say, creating one FT from one song, but how do you deal with the publication of an album?
Yeah, so there are different chains. So Ethereum is where most of the ecosystem is. Unfortunately, it's probably one of the most expensive as well. And so they've worked really hard to get down what's called their gas prices, but it's still not equivalent to maybe Polygon. And with Polygon, maybe you can mint for a few cents versus a few dollars. And at one point it was hundreds of dollars. Tezos is another blockchain in which it's so much cheaper to participate. And the Tezos blockchain has a lot of beautiful art and a lot of supportive collectors. But the ecosystem in terms of numbers are not there. And you also have Cardano, which is another chain that offers even more options to drop music, to drop different things, or Solana, where on the back end of the coding, they use Rust and Solidity, which is more complex than just Solidity for Ethereum. So there are other options, but the behavior change has not shifted outside of the major ecosystem of Ethereum. So Ethereum is where most people are, but unfortunately more expensive. And so you have to really be able to pick and choose, how do you want to show up with your music? Zora is another platform that kind of really fosters music, more of a focus than just art. Ethereum will have all different things on there, but Zora as a platform really fosters musicians, music videos, albums, songs, and a lot of our colleagues have done very successful drops with Zora.
So how about feature itself? What role does music play in the creation of stories at feature?
I think feature at the moment will probably circle back to the music side, because the IP and licensing in which we've created infrastructure for is specifically for entertainment, gaming, merch, kind of everything except music. But I think the proof of concept can be translatable, but you have to understand that on the licensing side, music is so different from the film side, the entertainment side. And so once smart contracts or licenses can be produced for that vertical, we can just integrate that into feature. The other amazing thing that we have is it's currency agnostic. So we're not tied into any one blockchain. We actually have access to dApps or decentralized apps that people can build for their project, and they can gate it. So for example, they could be on feature, and I'll describe it as if you kind of have Apple TV meets Netflix meets YouTube, and it's all in one spot, and you can stream Web3 content off of feature. And you can say, hey, for my project, you have to use Ethereum to get in, or you have to own the NFT to get in to watch my channel, or you can leave it open. Maybe you're more around education and you just want people to go to feature, stream education. It's absolutely free for everyone. Or again, you can gamify it and reward your holders. So the dApp component really offers an infinite amount of solutions. You could use different blockchains for it. You can use ApeCoin if you wanted. And that's kind of something that we're offering that's very different. Music can come in and build a dApp as well. I can't say some of the names who we were talking to because it's not set yet, but yeah, it's really open to the dApps from there on.
Does feature score its own music, or does it license music from existing catalogs?
We have original feature content. So we've brought some of the IP that I mentioned, like Huxley, Love, Death, and Robots, another project with Kaisa coming out with David Ayer, who did the Fast and the Furious. So that's a car project called Lollipop. So we not only foster those big world building IP, but we, again, like open it up for people to create what they want to create, no matter what vertical that is.
Have you managed to actually use any of your own music while working there?
I've put my music on Ethereum with collaborators. I think a more interesting integration for music would be EV3, because that's their sole focus. Feature is tackling almost every other aspect of entertainment except for music without directly, right? So there will be options for feature in which people can participate. But in terms of who's directly working on music, I would point my arrow more towards platforms like Zora. Dave Curry is on Dequency, which is more IP and licensing for music, and sync licensing for music on chain. And then Evidence 3, who's actually tackling that music stem problem from the root cause and not after the song is finished, but before and getting everyone paid. So that's who I would kind of more recommend for music. I think feature down the line, people will bring music to it, but our focus is all the other aspects of entertainment.
I don't know how much experience you have with Dequency, but could you explain it as a project? Because I know a lot of people would be interested in what the metaverse might offer for musical uh, economics.
Yeah, so Dequency on their site, it's like the soundtrack to the metaverse. So the metaverse is another very interesting integration in which a lot of projects, brands, and companies are trying to find their footing, because you see both a lot of adoption into these worlds, and escapism. And this is not actually new. The Web3 version of it is maybe the next iteration. But for a long time, people went into metaverses like Earth 2 and Sims and things like that. What's kind of different in this day and age is leveraging that community, building within, and not just kind of roaming in a world, but actually coming together for a concert. You've seen this with Travis Scott. You've seen this with other artists trying to come in and participate. But it's a little bit clunky right now. And just like the different chains, there are different metaverses, and they all have different feels to them. So some of them, like voxels, which I know Natalie loves, you kind of have these mannequin bodies. And then you have really deep ones like Wilder World, in which they build worlds within their world. They want to have shops in there where you can purchase merch. Maybe you want to buy shoes in there. And so the use cases are very interesting across each metaverse, and they offer different assets in which might be interesting to your community. Right now, one of the problems or challenges is the interoperability between the metaverses. So if I have an avatar in Decentraland, I can't just hop over to crypto voxels or voxels and I will look the same, because in that world, the avatars are different. And so that's another conversation that makes it difficult for people to just jump seamlessly into each world. And so as a brand or a company or an artist, you have to kind of make a choice. Where do you want your storytelling to begin? And same with your NFT project. Sometimes people shift chains. And so you had a big team called Doodles, in which Pharrell is on like the back end of that as well. He was added kind of like an advisor on the music end, and they moved chains from one to Flow. And sometimes you have to shift in the space, and not everything is translatable. So it's very much in that thought process of where do you want to build? And if you have to pivot, where do you want to pivot and why? Is it because your audience really likes how it looks in that world? Do you see more retention in one metaverse than you do when you had it in another? And these are all options you have to be very flexible about and very conscious about with your community.
Do you think music journalism is up to speed with these developments? Do you see good journalism that helps people navigate these difficult choices?
Unfortunately, not. I mean, that's across the spectrum with metaverses and chains. If you're participating now, if you're hopping into Twitter spaces, if you're having conversations around it, if you're attending conferences, satellite events, oftentimes that information is it's so much more ahead than what articles are producing. And that's kind of a general sense, but especially in Web3, I feel like articles are behind. And a really easy proof of concept of this was when we were starting with Huxley, we actually got a lot of pushback on PR. People are like, don't ever mention NFTs to us. We'll never publish about it. So beyond just being up to date, there was pushback to even want to give information out, to even want to bring people over, to even have an objective view on it so that people could learn and decide for themselves. It was just a straight no. And so now you're seeing a little bit of a shift, but it was really difficult in the beginning to have people want to publish about it.
Is that because you think people assumed that were just negative stereotypes, that this is a boom market and doesn't have any real value?
Absolutely. It's always compared to the .com bubble. It's compared to certain, scams that come up. certain bad actors, whatever makes good headlines, whatever makes good clickbait, whatever, is something to galvanize around, in which people are already stigmatizing about. And so that's a great article to read, or that's something that will get your numbers up as a journalist, but not so much the opportunity, not so much the transparency of how new it is. I think that's something we don't talk about very often. You have people that talk about this space as if they're experts because maybe they got into crypto sooner, but they're not necessarily up to date on how fast it moves. And to me, that's really important. Being part of being an educator is to actually be up to date, not just to be early. You can be early and be totally out of the loop. And so it's a very important distinction to constantly learn. And I would hope that articles would bring more of that transparency, because when you have this level of saying you're an expert, but something falls through, now you've lost trust with your audience. Now we can't trust that you're an expert, or maybe you're an expert and something went wrong. So, what are you really an expert about? Or, so the transparency would be really important for journalism to capture, so that the audience can also understand that it is a new space and it is growing, and that we invite more brilliant minds to help us solve the problems that we're collectively in this small group trying to solve.
Those negative stereotypes will be stubborn, right? Some of them might endure for quite a long time. So how do you persuade people? What do you think, let me put it more simply, what do you think the most promising avenue for evolutional development is beyond collectibles? How will this technology help musicians beyond the ability to create unique recordings?
I think it's really important to understand where your personal pain point is as a musician. If it's on the remuneration side, if you're trying to fund music videos, if you're trying to get visibility, who do you want to maybe collaborate with or get your story in front so that you can actually show the world what you have to bring. Maybe it's PR, maybe it's building a community, maybe you need a team and a head of community to start gathering and aggregating your super fans, educating them. So it's a very complex answer, but it has to start with your personal pain points, because each artist will have strengths and weaknesses, and that's where you need to build around your personal management and how blockchain can solve for some of those problems, and then you can go from there.
When we spoke to Dave, he said that the best place to keep up with Web3 was still Twitter. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a great place to keep up. I think each kind of socials starts to expand it a little bit more. You saw kind of the rise and the fall of Meta and Instagram. So Instagram briefly offered NFTs, and one of my friends was the first one to drop with Instagram, and it sold out and it did really well. And he's an amazing photographer. But at the same time, another few colleagues, they had problems, technical problems. And then as recent as, I believe, last week or a few days ago, they pulled out. They said no more NFTs. And so they're trying to figure out, how to navigate without these things being a security, or without getting pushback, or maybe it's too soon sometimes to show to the masses. And so Twitter is kind of, a good place for people to talk about the problems. But again, you see big brands coming in and out, big names come in and out. And it's kind of, I guess that's why for me, my focus, you talk about persuasion and things like that and getting people in and retention. To me, the education is asymmetrically, pronounced towards onboarding people in. And I think education needs to happen internally a lot more for us to get on the same page with developers and tech, so that the user experience invites more people to come in, versus trying to put a lot of effort to invite people in to a place that doesn't have high security or has complex communities within Discord, within Telegram, all this fragmentation. There's not really a centralized area for education, right? We say, oh, join Twitter, join these rooms, right? There's different pockets of education. There's nothing that's centralized. So I really believe that we have to internally educate the people that are already working on this process and working on blockchains, and then, bring the attention inward a bit more. I just think it's totally off balance of trying to bring people in a place that's highly in its developing stages.
That's great. So I just really have one final question that relates to recent news. A lot of these platforms and parallel universes, and in fact the metaverse as a whole, will sound very attractive as a place to either license your music or stage virtual shows. What went wrong with Facebook and the metaverse, do you think? Because that sort of counteracts all that optimism. I can imagine a conversation where you would explain this technology optimistically and somebody will immediately tell you, no, Facebook is laying off tens of thousands of people. What do you think happened?
Well, what's important to know is the ethos of the space and some of the new numbers that I think Web 2 is not used to. For example, with art, when you put your art in a gallery, they could take up to 50% of the price. It's always between 40 and 60%. Massive amounts that they take when your art gets sold through curation, through putting up in the gallery, etc. In Web 3, I remember helping a very prominent artist. His name is Justin Bua. And he signed with a platform that said, hey, we're going to take 15%, 15 or 20%. He's like, this is amazing. Usually galleries take 50% of my money. And I told him, Justin, you should have told me before, there are platforms that take like 5%, and 15 or 20% is high. That's actually really high in the NFT space for a platform to take that much of your money. And so there's, again, the concepts we have of Web 2 that do not translate anymore in Web 3. So when Meta was offering things with, 30%, or you can't have certain apps on your iPhone, it really shut off the current Web 3 space, and it got pushed back from us. And that's how much control we have in such a small community, that we can actually shift how brands, big brands and companies are entering in the space. You also had an example with Porsche doing a drop, and it went terrible because people didn't get anything from what they paid for. And so it's kind of, it's really interesting to actually see the creator power and the small but strong collective voice that can shift some of these big companies and brands. So I think Meta is taking a step back. Like I said, with Instagram, they had technical difficulties with some of the drops. That's not going to look good. So instead of coming out quick and trying to jump on the trend of what's happening in our world, it's probably wise of them to step back and say, how do we revamp this? How do we create better verbiage around it? How do we get retention so this is beneficial to us, right? So that is the very, very interesting concept that you don't usually see with tech, is the power of the creator. So yeah, I don't want to say like hopefully Meta figures it out, because I'm not necessarily a fan or not a fan, but it's a proof of concept of what not to do in Web3 and what will not be supported. High prices like that, high gas fees, putting the creators on the short end of the stick as usual.
Well, on that very sobering note, thank you very much for your time. We've reached the end of the hour very quickly. But listen, thanks for squeezing it in. Where are you now geographically?
I am in Mexico, and I will be back to LA on Friday, and then soon off to, in a couple of weeks, to NFT NYC. I'll be speaking there, and whatever the conference route is, it's going to be really busy. Hopefully I'll see some of you folks around, or some things are streamed as well. Would love to have you guys at any satellite events that I put on. And I love everyone's questions. It really helps us build this space better. And I hope to see all of you around and participating as well.
Thank you. Where's the best place for people to reach you or follow your observations?
Yeah, you can reach me through my Twitter. And from there, we can do email. We can do Zooms like this, but Twitter will be a great place to start.
That's fantastic. You've been really kind, and especially for squeezing us in at the beginning of what sounds like a terrible day.
No problem. Thank you so much.
See you later.
See ya. Bye.
Bye. Okay, we have with us Mr. Azeem Khan.
How are you?
There you are, fantastic. You jumped into view. Whereabouts are you geographically?
I am in New York City at the moment.
Oh, okay, so that's slightly more humane time of the day.
Yeah. It's a little afternoon for me, so it's a comfortable time. I've been up since 5.
No, I can tell by the sunlight behind you that it's a lot later in the day than we are.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you're a great guest to have towards the end of this boot camp because these guys are basically all creatives um, spread across the world at this particular time. And so we've been through all the fundamental scientific concepts. We've been introduced to a lot of different startups. I've sent people links to your work, to some of your major endeavors and so on. But you'd be a great person to speak to about the direction in terms of investments and where industry interest and faith is going at the moment. So I wonder if you could just give us a brief introduction to your own professional trajectory and how you came to be involved with this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was entirely by mistake. I ran the I have a bachelor's and a master's in biology, and I had aspirations of going to medical school. And I ran the Boston Marathon that happened a decade ago that had the tragic bombings. And I was living in Boston that week when the Boston lockdown happened as well. And so it was just a moment where I had a lot of time to reflect on what it was that I wanted out of life, considering there were more than one opportunity to die that week. And so I made the decision. I only wanted to do things that I was completely happy doing, and that didn't include medicine. And so I decided to rescind applications to the medical schools that I was applying to. And I quit a great biotech job that I was working at the time, and decided to then jump face first into a tech startup that I'd been working on at the same time. And I got to start writing around then too, because I submitted an article to the Huffington Post about my experiences as a Pakistani American Muslim at a time when everyone was looking to point fingers at Muslims because the attackers happened to also be Muslims. And so that's honestly what started this career trajectory. Later that year in 2013, I was on Twitter a lot, even back in 2012 and 2013. And I'd been hearing about this concept of Bitcoin and Bitcoin and Bitcoin. And so I started reading about it. I'd read the white paper and just like started looking at what people are talking about on Twitter at the time. And the idea of the like challenging the concept of what is money philosophically, just being able to look at the debates of that was just a fascinating one for back then. And then later that year, I actually ended up meeting a group of people who were starting the New York City Bitcoin Center here in the financial district in New York. And they asked me to potentially write about the event. They were doing a party for New Year's Eve in 2013. So I ended up just casually going and checking it out. And it really expanded my mind as to what was possible beyond the speculative nature of I'd been buying and selling Bitcoin that year, and goes to 100, goes to 1,000, make some money, spend all of it. Think I'm some sort of, trading savant. And I really started thinking about the possibilities that were coming with the new technology. Early 2014, sort of as a joke, I tried launching something called Kim Kardashian, and I got, yeah, and I got a lot of press, including like Newsweek. And once that press came out, I ended up getting a cease and desist from the Kardashian family about, there was no way I could launch this, and so, or from their attorneys, not directly from them. And so I ended shuttering that, but it had me start thinking about the notion of what people are today calling social tokens and saying, were you in a position as a sports team, as a celebrity, whatever, to launch a token, what that could do. And around the same time as well, I had left my startup in early 2014 and just founder differences, as happens in the world of startups often. And I thought that I was going to use this Huffington Post platform to start interviewing some of my favorite musical artists. And I noticed that essentially none of them, other than maybe the Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, Drake, and Kanye West, would actually get interviews on a platform like the HuffPost. And so I chose to just start cold reaching out to different artists and their managers and publicists, not having a clue as to what I was doing. And very quickly started being able to build a set of relationships because I wasn't out to do any hit pieces. I was a contributor on the side who was not making any money and was doing this just because I was a fan of the music. And I got a chance to meet with my favorite artists and have conversations with them about the things that I would have wished I could have when I was younger. I would like ask them to wear the chains that they had and like take photos with them and get to go backstage to shows. And all it required was for me to write about the music that I already, the artists that I enjoyed already. So very quickly, I don't know if anyone in here is familiar with such a sorry, way back in the 90s, Big Sean, Bun B, Talib Kweli, T.I., Jermaine Dupri, Hobson, DJ Drama, just a lot of really big names in the space. And very quickly started building a Rolodex as well because I wasn't coming to anybody as like a person who I wasn't a singer, I wasn't a songwriter, I was making money on the side in the tech space doing strategy and consulting work with startups. And so I didn't have any need to make any ask. And so very quickly just started building casual relationships with different people in the music industry. And was it 2016? A friend of mine ended up hacking, funny enough, one of the Kardashians' apps at the time, and in LA. And as a result, he ended up getting a ton of inbound as like, what was seen as like the super hacker. And it was from athletes and artists to build websites and things like that. And so from there, we actually ended up taking what we were doing and turned it into a business of just like website and app development. And we ended up working with Bryson Tiller, Dreamville Records, Ray Shremmerd. We did some stuff for Universal Music Group, like a handful of things. We had a project that was unreleased with Kanye West. We did something with Tiana Taylor, and it was all just I already had relationships. People knew who I was, and now we had added this like additional mechanism of being able to build products. Throughout all this time, I'd still been looking at what was going on in crypto, but things were completely dead until summer of 2017. Everything really took off, and ICO stuff started happening where people are launching tokens left and right. And I was back to like buying and selling different tokens and getting involved in ICOs and like strategy consulting again with different projects. And did that through.
Sorry to interrupt you for just a second.
Yeah.
The translator's asking if you can maybe increase your volume a little bit.
Let's see. Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, if you sit a little bit closer as well, it's even better. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, and so with the initial coin offerings, I was, just getting involved in what was going on was the buzz of the time, and did that for the remainder of the year. It was funny at the time. I was working with an executive at Rock Nation, which is Jay-Z Sports and Entertainment Company, and was working with an executive there who we were building a gaming company together. And I was the person who ended up helping to onboard all of the top executives at Rock Nation to Coinbase that summer because I was like, I was the crazy crypto person to them. I was like, download this app named Coinbase and you need to then, go buy Bitcoin, go buy Ethereum, don't look at the price, set up an auto buy and just keep purchasing more. This is the future. And so I don't know how much they actually accumulated, but I was that crazy crypto person to that like very inner circle in the music industry back then. And time went by, I was building a gaming company, the bear market came again, and I was still building this gaming company until towards the end of 2019. And that's when I learned about NFTs. I met a gaming company that was doing blockchain-based card game, essentially, like Magic the Gathering. And when I heard about what an NFT was and the possibilities for it using the Ethereum blockchain at the time, I ended up leaving my position at Rock Nation or at Unanimous Games. We were incubated by Rock Nation. We weren't actually employees of Rock Nation at the time, but ended up leaving with the hopes of trying to start a gaming company in the crypto space. And every venture capitalist laughed at me. So similar to social tokens, I was way too early. I almost ended up becoming one of the first non-founding employees at OpenSea, but they didn't have the capacity to hire anyone who didn't have technical expertise. And after that, I went to a company named Aglet, which was Pokemon Go for sneakerheads. It was a tech application,
Sorry, how do you
and
spell?
worked AGLET, so the aglet at the tip of a shoelace for
Oh,
sneakers.
okay, I got you. Yep.
Yeah. And so I joined that company prior to their launch and helped them do a launch. We were quite successful at the time. They were actually still very successful. I think to date they've raised over $25 million now. They've moved into the crypto space, working with Immutable X for their NFTs. But at the time, we're a little crypto phobic. But we did the first partnership with Gucci for their metaverse initiatives. We worked with a handful of sneaker companies. We got to a six-figure user base. This was when COVID had started. And so it was a good run with them. But towards the end of 2020, I started feeling the itch to get back into crypto again, this time at a better time in a sense, because early 2021, I ended up going out, I left Aglet and I started raising money for a company named Pollinate. And the purpose of Pollinate was basically a Kickstarter for creators, so a crowdfunding platform specifically built to help fund creative initiatives. And we
Sorry to
raised
interrupt again. So how do we spell that?
POLINATE.
ATE, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And so ended up raising about $1.5 million for that. And we, built a product, launched the token. This was all in 2021. Had a very interesting experience in the middle of the bull run because you're in this position where you're essentially like a publicly traded company, but you're not in a place where you're mature enough to have to focus on the things that come with being a publicly traded company. And so I didn't have the ability to split my time in a way that would give me time to make sure that the product was good while also making sure that we could do what we needed to get the token price up, because everything was just about trading the token. And while it was a great experience at the end of 2021, I ended up stepping away. It was just a burning out experience, and spent the next couple of months just doing some consulting for various agencies. Never in my life, by the way, since December of 2021, have I seen the kind of inbound that I have for being a non-technical person in this space, because them looking for someone who had a deep technical understanding, but was also just a regular business person, ended up being invaluable. And so for a few months, just working with different agencies, in 2021, I had done a venture fellowship with a venture firm here in New York City. And I helped co-author a paper on the future of content monetization as well, where I focused on metaverse, blockchain, DAOs, like video games, just like some of those buzzwords of the time in 2021. And then around about a year ago now, I ended up joining Gitcoin, which is where I am now. And they're a company that gives out grants to open source software developers across different verticals. To date, we've given out over $50 million in grants. And by a handful of estimates, the financial impact of that 50 million has been approximately $29 billion. Today, still, I'm though like very much into the music space, also hip hop. I actually submitted an article to CoinDesk yesterday that I'm hoping is going to be published either tomorrow or sometime next week. About there was a mixtape streaming platform that was looking like that it was going to fail this week, called DatPiff, and it's been around for DATPIFF. It's been around for 18 years, and some of the most successful hip hop artists have released their mixtapes on it. And very quickly, I looked into trying to start a DAO to raise money to buy it if it was really actually shutting down, because the access to the treasure trove of IP that they have was something that I thought would be the best way to onboard people to Web3. So I ended up writing an article about that for CoinDesk that should be coming out soon. I'm hoping. I submitted it last night. But yeah, that is my, took a while, but that is my background to get to where I am today.
Exactly. So it sounds like from the very beginning, you used journalism as a way to meet people that you already liked, and then that established little by little a very valuable network. And
Yes.
over and above collectibles, what aspect of Web3 technology have you focused on with regard to entertainment? What seems the most promising application of the technology if we put aside all of the open seas and the nifty gateways and so on?
I think the idea of having a digital item that you actually own is a fascinating concept in music, in video games, and sort of anything. I mean, to date, from just if you look at the way servers work in Web 2, you don't actually own a ticket when you buy it from Ticketmaster. You just have like a tick box on Ticketmaster's server that they choose to say that you have purchased this ticket. But the idea of having access to a crypto wallet, which allows you to hold the digital item and the ownership of that digital item, and then be able to not have anyone take it away from you, because the secret key to that wallet is yours and yours alone, is something, to me, just digital property rights as we move into an increasingly digitally native world is something that seems paramount across the board. And I think the entertainment industry is one of the places that is absolutely going to use it. It feels very similar to like the Napster moment where people started downloading, songs on Napster. I'm old enough to have been a Napster user back then, and there were a lot of there was a lot of snags, but it completely and fundamentally changed the way that music is consumed.
I just forgot my question now. Hold on a second, it's coming back to me. Oh, yes. So when you're talking about it was ownership, that's what I wanted to ask about. So the idea of owning something, because you mentioned tickets. So a ticket is, exists very often in the physical and the digital world simultaneously. And we've seen several of the artists this week speak about the need on Web3 to multiply their skill set and their output. So they're generating not just music, but merchandise and other products. Say, let's say, for example, visual art to go with the sonic art. Are you at all working with other tangible objects? Are you working with musicians who incorporate, let's say, NFTs into physical merchandise?
To date, I haven't. I started writing for FWB, which is a social DAO, one of the most prominent of them, in March or April of last year as well, for their weekly newsletter, TLDR. And I've been writing about music NFTs for it since then. And for the most part, a lot of this has just been an intellectual curiosity for me about the places that things can go and the new technologies that are coming out. But at the moment, one of the biggest things that I've seen is that, and this is almost a heresy to people, but I don't think that artists themselves are going to be the ones that are managing the input and output of all of these things. As someone who has spent significant time in the music industry, most of the artists I know only want to focus on making their art, and the best ones of them do that, and then they outsource all of the business aspects of things to a manager. How good that manager is ends up depending on a variety of factors, but the artists themselves are not the ones who end up figuring out how are they going to drop ship their merch, or are they going to order 50 pieces, and what sizes are they going to be, and how do they make sure that there's capital efficiency in purchasing the product, getting the product made and then shipping the product. None of those things are things that I have seen successful artists work on, and I have worked with, at least in the hip hop space, some of the most successful artists in the world. And that's one of the things that I've seen as a whole when I've been looking at this industry, is that artists are being stretched very thin in having to be the ones who figure out how to do all of these things in a very new technology, while also being expected to continue to do their art. And oftentimes, new artists are not ones that come from financially amazing positions. And so it's not even like they have all the time in the world either. And so part of it for me has been waiting to see some more and then better infrastructure developed that is going to end up allowing these artists to outsource some of this work to different people on their team so that they can focus on what it is that they do best. And for me, for the most part, I've just been watching and paying attention. It's why things with the DatPiff announcement were so interesting to me, because I keep seeing just like every other week there's a new music NFT platform that's launching, and this one's on Algorand and this one's on Polygon. One has a relationship with UMG and the other one is working with the label that The Weeknd is signed to. And none of them really ever amount to anything. I like what Snoop Dogg was doing with owning all of the rights to Death Row Records and then being able to sell NFTs around it and some of the innovative things that he could do, but it ends up going back to owning IP. And so for now, I have not stepped into the ring. I almost did this week. Had DatPiff really been going down, I was already within hours speaking to investors about all of the ways in which we could turn this into a very real business.
So it sounds like you're interested in taking existing uh, copyright and somehow reinvigorating it using Web3.
Potentially, I don't think that's going to be primarily the only way, but at the moment, I think that it's one of the ways in which I see the easiest ability. There's brand recognition, there's an existing user base, there's access to legacy content that people have an emotional tie to, there's relationships that can then be utilized using those influencers already to be able to create novel and unique things and experiences for the fans that want to take part in it. The reality of, I mean, anyone, if the people here are musicians, everyone knows that the route to success is a long one. It's one of those things where it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And the platforms at the moment, when you make any sort of marketplace, there's buyers and then there's sellers. And just because you create access to content doesn't mean that there's going to end up being buyers for that content. And so to me, the idea of potentially being able to stimulate a marketplace where people do have that, and it's not based on speculation. If you told me that I could go back and find NFT music versions of some of the music that I grew up with and that I really appreciate, even if it was free and you created like a streaming platform around, even if you weren't monetizing it, I'm very likely to want to go on and then just try it out, as opposed to this world where there's zero curation in Web3 music. You're inundated with new platforms and new technology and new artists. You have no tie to any of them. It's just like, it's not a good user experience.
So it sounds like there are two pressing concerns. Well, not pressing, there's an opportunity and a concern at the same time. The opportunity would be, you think, to breathe new life into old copyright because the fans are already there, they already care. And the other one is basically disorder and chaos, right? That currently, if, it's almost like the Web3 music world is a victim of its greatest asset. So if the charm and the appeal and the romance and the democratic promise is decentralization, then at the same time, decentralization can reach a point where it's too decentered and you've no idea where to look and what to look for.
That's exactly what it is. One of the things that I've written about now is how I think that one of the first most monetizable things are going to be who the curators are, because now the curators can find a way to be able to be paid well. And so imagine a Spotify playlist for the 100 most popular songs that end up being listened to a ton, but the person who curates that list is able to guarantee that they're able to take a certain percentage of royalties from that for the time that it's on the playlist. There's it's not something that's been done yet, but the idea of doing that ends up with programmable royalties, putting curators into a very good position. Everything ends up being cycles of bundling and unbundling. And we're in a cycle of what has been a lot of unbundling when we talk about Web3 music. But I think once some of the bundling starts to take place again, people want to not have to think about it. I mean, for anybody who has access to streaming services for watching content, how many times have you guys sat down and said, I have Netflix, I have Hulu, I have Amazon, I have Disney, and you spend 40 minutes looking for what to watch. And instead, you your friend who texted you that says this new movie came out, you really need to watch it, and then you just go watch it. And I think something similar has been going on with Web3 music, but once some level of centralization starts to take place, we'll actually see some forward progress.
Do you see, oh, I've got two questions on my mind simultaneously. Let's take the legacy content first of all. Let's take the promise of Web3 for copyright that already exists. Where have you seen investment interest in that? Any particular genres or periods or catalogs that are attractive to Web3 investors?
I would say most Web3 investors, sadly, wouldn't know culture if it punched them in the face. It is why all of them like look so terrible and dress so terribly. And like, so I think that they're a little bit behind the times. I think there's also a really big disconnect between the people who are technologists and the people who are curators of culture, where the things that seem very obvious to the people who spend time in culture don't seem obvious at all to the people in technology. And those are two worlds that often need a bridge to be able to connect. And it's been one of the things that I've been working at, I would say my entire career now, that the running theme has been finding ways to connect art, music, and fashion to technology in interesting and innovative ways. But I would say the problem tends to be the people with the money and the people who are smart technologically speaking just don't actually know what cool is at all.
So let's presume that investors don't know what is cool, but curators do know what is cool. How do you see curators being perhaps paid in the future? How do you see that they get a very small percentage baked into the smart contract of the music? Will that be paid by larger platforms? So let's say, for example, Spotify decentralizing a little bit and letting people get paid for playlists, or do you see labels doing it or musicians doing it and paying their own fans to curate and promote their music for them?
I think it's going to end up being a new version of sort of what happens already. There's a very popular notion in the music industry of something called payola, and it's always existed. And payola is, you know, going with a bag of money to different promoters and to different DJs and to different record labels, and oftentimes these days to the people who are setting up and curating the playlists on places like Spotify. And there being a lot of behind the scenes payments that take place for people to be able to get their music played or to be at the top of a playlist or be played on the radio at a specific hour. And I think that that idea is just going to be something that you're going to be able to bake into the business instead of it having to be these shady payments that people never admit to, but everyone knows happens.
Does that then bring back the danger of intermediaries again? So if decentralization is designed to get rid of those people, are we seeing the risk of intermediaries spoiling the romance of the technology?
I think there's going to end up needing to be some sort of compromise that is made on both sides. I think that the idea of complete centralization or complete decentralization are both ones that don't end up working very well in practice, as opposed to the idea of having things where you sort of get to have hopefully the best of both worlds using a new technology that seems like it can offer it.
Implicitly, what you were getting at a few minutes ago was that if the investors don't really understand what's interesting or cool or aesthetically novel music, it also seems that you're suggesting managers, Web3 managers, are also not yet, they're not yet in existence. Would that also be fair?
Yeah, I would say that sounds very fair. I mean, the reality is that people in the music industry are very wary of the crypto world, as they should be. I mean, 2022 was a record level of scams and just like different things that blew up because there was embezzling and fraud going on. And the year prior to that, everyone was just seeing pictures of monkey JPEGs selling for $1 million, and they thought that was ridiculous too. And so I don't think that enough time has passed where the people, like, things like this are amazing to me because it shows people who are actually looking to properly on board and figure out how to use these technologies in a real way. But for the most part, I mean, even 2022 was supposed to be the year of the music NFT. And from everything that I saw, it was a lot of insiders peddling the things that they wanted to go up in value. And because people thought that those things would go up in value, the insiders were making money on pushing a lot of garbage. And no one ended up winning. But I think this idea of like getting the song sold for $5,000 and then getting royalties of it, it is less interesting to me than being able to create new technologies with programmable smart contracts that auto enforce royalty payments over certain periods of time, being able to rebuild what the streaming platform looks like, making sure that payments happen across the board in a more fair way that can be, you can take the human out of the process and making sure some of those things happen. And stuff like that takes time to educate. Like this is going to have, when we look back on this in 10, 15, 20 years, the way we're just talking about Napster, like it's going to end up being a massive and monumental shift in the music industry. And so I think it's only natural that it's going to take people some time to get caught up with things.
If you think the role of the curator is going to increase, I have an audience question that says, what if you don't know the curator? Are you shut out? In other words, is it just another form of another barrier that's difficult to overcome?
I think it's going to end up being, I mean, I think it's going to be similar, but in a different way to how things have been now. Like you can put out your song on SoundCloud, or you can use a distribution service and have it available on all other platforms. And you're going to be finding interesting ways to be able to do distribution. I mean, I think one of the really difficult things that access to so much easy distribution has created is that at times it feels like there are more musicians than there are fans. And so, you know, whereas in the past, the ability to record and then put out music was something that was limited by gatekeepers and was not an easy thing to do 20 years ago, even. And now we could turn this recording into a song that goes on SoundCloud after we get off of it, and we can use simple programs to like mix and master it to sound wacky. And because of that, being able to find unique ways to be able to do marketing or get in front of the right people or just doing promotion, it's completely where the difficulty now lies. I mean, the ways that people are trying to utilize TikTok to figure out how to get access to distribution now. Because how do you get your song heard when there's no barriers to put a song out? And so in a sense, like it does make certain parts of it more difficult, but at the same time, there's all these technologies that have made it easier to put out music and then soon monetize the music as well.
So we've spoken a bit about some possible, not benefits, but some promising trajectories for larger labels. So let's say rework, or even investors. So, you know, major investors as well, reworking with old content in new ways. Do you see any interest from investors in micro markets or regional scenes or small niche streaming services that are dedicated to a particular genre? Because, you know, so much music, whether it's outside of the English language or it's outside of the mainstream aesthetically, just disappears because, you know, Apple Music is bottomless. And there used to be that wonderful website, which I don't think exists anymore, that would randomize tracks that have never been played on Spotify. So
interesting.
It used to
honestly, I haven't heard anything like this, but it would make a lot of sense to me for something like this to come about. But this isn't something I'm like seeing at all as of yet. That would be super cool.
Yeah, I just found the website. It's called Forgotify. So
Forgotify. I'm going to check that out.
Millions of songs that have been forgotten. So there's songs that have either never been played or almost never been played, and it just randomizes them. So it'll give you the most insane. You know, it'll be a medieval prayer followed by death metal, followed by, you know.
interesting.
So you do see that perhaps whatever the major labels do, we might see a degree of organize. We'll take the current chaos, and it might
Mhm.
coalesce into regional scenes or stylistically specific scenes that have a small number of dedicated fans. Does that seem like a reasonable
I do.
constellation?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that that seems very reasonable. And I don't think that the major labels who, if you look at like, Universal Music Group's revenue numbers, I haven't looked since 2022, but it seemed like they were doing record profits year on year, basically. And I think because of that, also, they're not really incentivized as those kinds of incumbents to actually play with this new technology at the
Mhm.
moment. But if you put them in a position that someone creates something successful, they're more than likely to just buy it the way that Google oftentimes or Facebook over the years or any of these large companies, it doesn't make as much sense for them to create some of these newer products. But when it comes time, they know that they need to actually get invested into it. And so they end up just spending their money. And so I see larger record labels taking their time getting involved in this by just doing acquisitions. Like, I've seen this even with management companies for artists over the last 5 to 10 years. Was there used to be a bunch of really small management companies, and then everyone started just getting bought up, or sports agencies started getting bought up by CAA, where they say that it's a partnership with the press release, but it's really just, we're going to give you upfront capital based on the contracts that you have access to and potential revenue that's going to be created from those contracts. We'll give you upfront money. You will now come under our umbrella, and they figure out what that looks like from a business perspective, where it's mutually beneficial to both sides.
So if you look at some of the major catalog acquisitions recently, so people like who's sold recently, Springsteen or Elton John or Celine Dion, just some names in the last 2 or 3 months, people who
Mhm.
sold their entire catalog. Do you think some of that catalog might reappear as Web3?
Definitely. I think one of the most interesting people in the music business that people almost like sort of forget is brilliant as he is Scooter Braun, who manages Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, Lil Dicky. I don't even know. He used to manage Kanye West, Demi Lovato. Like he, he came up under Jermaine Dupri, and from the Atlanta scene. And Jermaine Dupri is a very popular hip hop producer who did very well in the 90s and 2000s. And he learned under his tutelage. And Scooter Braun has been amazing. And in the past few years, I don't know what he's been doing or how he did it, but every time I look around, he is acquiring another catalog of music for some sort of like deca or centimillion amount of money. And I think that he is really well positioned to be in a position where like he would do something similar. I mean, Justin Bieber, I think, sold a certain portion of his rights to his music recently.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
like, yeah, so everywhere I look, Scooter Braun is somehow quietly masterminding access to becoming like a monolith in the IP space for music.
What do you think the main appeal is? Well, actually, no, before I get to that question, when you are working with, let's say, fellow investors or people who are less au fait with the technology, how do you help people get over that barrier of complexity? How do you get them to understand that this is something that is not that difficult?
Just found it to be that you need to find easier ways using metaphors and analogies to explain the new technology and why it's going to end up being something that's interesting and beneficial in the years to come. I think that's what I've found just in general. It's the same as, when I talk to my siblings or I talk to my mother who know nothing about crypto, and they're like, well, why should I buy this? Or why should I be interested in this? Or, any of those things. And a lot of it tends to be people in this space, to me, like to sound smarter than they are, or something along those lines, where they don't want to use easy ways to explain what this technology is and why this technology is valuable. And for me, I don't think I understand it well enough if I don't know how to explain it to someone without getting into technical verbiage.
What would you suggest for a younger or burgeoning artist if they were looking for some type of financial support, or a label, if they thought that Web3 was a promising avenue of investigation? How might they approach an investor? What would be a persuasive argument, do you think? What would an investor be looking for?
I think that they need to be able to present, it depends if it's an individual artist looking for an investor versus a platform that's looking to be able to get an investor. Those things are separate.
Yep.
One of the things that's been interesting as an individual artist is that Web3 almost has this version of patronage, like from back during the Renaissance, where there are a lot of people that have become very successful in the crypto space in the last decade, and who are very convinced that giving back and being able to further this ecosystem is the most important thing they need to do. And so even in the past few days, there was a major hack for $200 million in the decentralized finance space of a company named Euler Finance, EULAR. And the hacker was communicating on just with people and with the organization. And there were certain people who just started asking the hacker for money, and he started sending them like different transactions of 100 ETH, where 100 ETH, which right now would be worth about $170,000, right? I think last I looked at the price, and so that's a strange version of patronage. But even the platform that we had created with Pollinate, a lot of it was around how do you offer unique access to a creator or to a creative, and what they could give to people who are willing to put up different tiers of money in a way that a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe or any of these platforms would allow. And so it's about trying to take a look at deeply understanding what are the potential offerings, and then being able to uniquely position yourself. For the platforms, I think if anything, investors need to become more scrutinizing, because it's almost too easy. As someone who spent time on the entertainment side, people start to melt when you start mentioning names of artists and their favorite names. The richest, most powerful people in the world start to melt if you tell them a behind the scenes story of Drake or Kanye West or Jay-Z or something. And I think people are too easily sold by those stories, but it's difficult not to be when you don't come from that world. And so for me, as I've been thinking about it, I keep seeing more and more platforms get funded who don't seem to have any reasonable road to success based on anything that I see. And so I've still been looking around being like, I'm not really impressed by the platform so far. I have been thinking about what would it take for me to become impressed. I'm really waiting. I have no idea Scooter Braun is going to do it. I have never spoken to him. I met him once behind the scene, backstage at a Kanye show, but I've never actually stayed in touch with him. And I'd be curious what his thoughts are and what his timelines are. I think the other thing is for real mainstream adoption, I think we're going to take a few years. The onboarding experience is still terrible. The experience with gas and interoperability of blockchains and user friendliness and ability to download things onto mobile. The Apple App Store is very anti-crypto. In the United States is very anti-crypto. And so just to be able to have portability for music, and if you're looking at Web3 music, is just there's so many things about it that are difficult at the moment.
So your view is actually that it's too easy to find investors?
To me, it's been the case. Absolutely. It's almost because there's no, unlike selling a finance app or something else, the metrics are way more difficult to say or success. And right now people are just throwing money at things. I've seen so many things get funded where I'm I don't understand who decided to put money towards this. I don't want to name names, but when
Sure.
I've looked at stuff, when I've looked at stuff, I've just been this doesn't make any sense. This is destined for failure.
So if we're talking about a general social presumption that the technology is tricky and only a minority of people actually use it. So therefore, it'll take a few years, like you said, for general adoption. Now would be the time for somebody to educate themselves, correctly?
Absolutely. Now is the time to do it. Now is, I mean, the same way people are talking about artificial intelligence at the moment. Now is the time to learn everything. Now is the time to understand the ins and outs, because by the time that real mainstream onboarding is going on, it's the time it takes to actually develop yourself. Like, artist development always takes time. The only artists that we've seen who didn't really do artist development and had success were one-hit wonders. And oftentimes what you find with one-hit wonders are that they ended up becoming successful, similar to winning the lottery. They put out something, they don't know why it succeeded. They saw a major success. They rode the highs of that success as long as they could. And then when they sat back down in the studio, they didn't know how to replicate their success because they hadn't put in the work and didn't actually know why they were successful to begin with. And so I think now is the time to really grow with the peers. I think one of the things that people, especially in the music industry, do is that they're always looking to figure out how to like do vertical relationship building as opposed to the horizontal lateral relationship building, because your peers end up growing with you over time. Whereas, you know, if you want to go talk to the biggest person in the room, you don't really have anything to offer them. And so while it's important to continue to do those things, paying attention to who are the other managers in the space, who are the other artists in the space, who's doing innovative stuff, you know, like, it doesn't matter if they haven't been hugely successful. The time is coming. It's almost like it happens with each technology. Like when it was Soulja Boy had done this with, I don't know if it was Morpheus. I forgot which platform, but at the time when he started putting out his music, Soulja Boy, famous rapper, would take the top 20 Billboard songs, and instead of actually uploading that music, he would upload the top 20 song and put his own music in there. And so people, like, he used like a social hack to get people to download his music and ended up becoming popular as a result. Or a perfect example is what's gone on with SoundCloud. I mean, SoundCloud artists, like, there's literally a genre for SoundCloud rappers. And so with each iteration of technology, there's almost certain, like, the streaming artist, Drake is the biggest streaming artist, right? Or Taylor Swift, or there's a few of them, Bad Bunny, is that they right place, right time, understood the ins and outs of the technology, and end up becoming defined by that era of technology. And I'm genuinely very curious who are going to be the artists and what they're going to do that will be known as like the Web3 artists, similar to like the SoundCloud rappers, who and what will be that iteration for Web3 music.
Can you think of an example of an artist who has maybe misunderstood there was a technology a little bit, or misapplied it, and it hasn't led to particular success?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Let me try another question, totally different trajectory. How about music outside of the English language, either within the United States or internationally? Do you see that that is also healthy?
I think one of the things that's been interesting, my parents were immigrants from Pakistan, but I was born and raised in the States. And so, you know, I have very much like firsthand seen the idea of like the just like coming up the American dream, if you'll call it. And growing up, the one biggest thing that I saw is that the United States' largest export was always culture, music and movies and television to everywhere else, social media platforms to everywhere else. What I've seen happen in the last 5 years, and only increasingly so, is that now the movies that are winning Oscars are not the American movies. The BTS is the biggest group in the United States. Now TikTok is being brought to here from China. And so I'm actually very bullish on that notion as a whole. There's an article that I saw the other day on Billboard about how Arab artists from the Middle East are just getting ready to pop. And, you know, Korean music has been a huge hit. And I mean, my girlfriend does not speak a word of Korean and is always sending me Korean music. Like, listen to this song, listen to that
Right.
song. And I'm like, you know, it's fascinating. And so, yeah, I very much think it's totally plausible that it'll be a non-American artist or entity that ends up figuring out how to utilize this technology best.
I mean, if you take K-pop, it's very often been a juxtaposition of languages within the lyrics, right? So you may have the verses in Korean, but the chorus in English and so on. Do you see those multilingual, or let's just say non-Anglo artists appealing to emigre communities, or actually having a broad appeal across
Main,
English speakers?
mainstream,
Yeah.
mainstream. I like, you know, I listen to Bad Bunny and J Balvin and other Hispanic, very popular artists, and I don't know what they're saying. Like, I took high school Spanish, but it's been a long time since high school, and it's just, it sounds good sonically. Or when I started listening to some of the BTS stuff and watching the music videos, I don't know a word of what they're saying except for when they go into English, but it's catchy, and you know, the beats are good, the melodies are good, even if I don't know what they're saying. And so I think they have like mainstream appeal. I mean, the way that I see BTS is like broken through. They're the last group that I saw really take off the way that BTS has would be One Direction, which was a decade ago.
Mhm.
And like, so like BTS, or like when I was growing up, it was NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, and it's, you know, One Direction, and now it's BTS, and I don't understand a word of what they're saying, but they literally have an army.
I mean, if you could probably draw a parallel with opera, right? So most of opera is, well, it's a broad observation, but a considerably large part of opera is not in English. That doesn't bother
Hmm.
me. So
Yeah.
people go to the opera, they enjoy the melodic sound of the language, but then you have what is sometimes called, you know, the super titles, so not the subtitles, but over the
Hmm.
stage you have a almost like a ticker tape running in English. There's no reason why you can't bring in
Interesting.
translation. And I always wondered whether, if you had, for example, I don't speak a word of Korean, but if you had a song that
Yeah.
had the original Korean text plus a
Mm.
transliteration, so just phonetically written out, so I'm able to sing along, and then an English translation, I can imagine that that would have a broad crossover appeal. So once again, you wouldn't need to know the original Korean, but maybe even if there was an English version that's scanned, you know, so rhythmically it actually,
Yeah.
you could sing it out in English, totally different words, that there would be an opportunity, maybe if those musicians even did two versions of every song, one with English lyrics, one with Korean, and
Hmm.
so on and so forth. So yeah, we may be reaching a tipping point where the predominance of English is slowly fading into the background.
Yeah. It's something that, like, I can't say is for certain, but it's something that's totally plausible to me. That's one of the bigger things, is that 5 years ago, the idea of it would have been laughable, and now it's definitely worth entertaining.
So let me just ask you a final question. What would your advice be for, I mean, most of the audience, they are up and coming artists, so they will play, you know, regionally at home, but Russia's the biggest country in the world. So if they're currently at home in Russia, then there's obviously going to be a radius beyond which it doesn't make physical sense to travel, right? Why travel
Hmm.
800 miles to a show if you're going to lose more money than you earn at the concert? So if you can
Of
find,
course.
there's obviously a rationale for a lot of these communities because they overcome the problem of geography. But what would your
Hmm.
advice be to younger artists, either in terms of education or seeking funding or joining communities?
I think because things are in such flux when it comes to Web3 music, we're in a place where you can use Twitter and Discord in particular in a way that can far out surpass your ability to be able to meet people in person. And because things are in flux, you're in a great place to be able to take advantage of, there's like a rebuilding going on. And so spending time, I mean, my journey for the most part in Web3 has been spending time on the internet, oftentimes with people who are pseudonymous, sometimes completely anonymous, and having done things with them. We've made money together, we've worked on things, we've written things. And so the power of the internet right now is still something, especially in a space that, like, I wouldn't say Web3 is a fully meritocratic industry. I don't think anything is fully meritocratic. But when I look at it, I still see what is one of the most meritocratic thing in industries across the board at the moment. If you wanted to go into traditional finance and work at Goldman Sachs, like there is a prescribed trajectory that you need to have done. And if you have not done those things, you will not go to McKinsey. You will not go to Harvard Business School. You will not go to Goldman Sachs. Those things don't exist yet for Web3. And right now it's going to end up being about the way that people find each other, build relationships with each other, and work together. And almost all of that is being done on the internet. I mean, Professor, look the way that, you know, we met. I was in a Telegram group with someone who mentioned if there was people who had music experience and had been writing about music, and if, you know, they could send a DM. I sent them the DM, and then you and I ended up getting on email together, and now we've been coordinating over the course of weeks. We have never met in person. We've never been on the phone. This was the first time I got to see you, and we organized everything, and we're able to do this for the different people that are listening today. And so in the same way, I think that it's just an excellent time to be able to take advantage of the opportunities, because I can't say that they will for sure last.
That's great. That's a wonderful place on which to end. So before I say thank you, where's the best place, do you think, for people to follow your news and observations and
I'd say
journalism?
my Twitter, it's just AZEEMK_ is my handle on Twitter. Don't have Instagram. I don't have TikTok. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Snapchat. I've progressively deleted things over the years, and and have concentrated into Twitter and then LinkedIn. But I would say my Twitter is definitely the place where I have way more of my open thoughts.
That's great. I pass that on. Well, listen, thanks for being such a philosopher, and I wish you a good day.
Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
See you.